Kansas, 1872. The sun beat down on the dust-thick air of Dodge City, where the crowd gathered tight around the auction block like buzzards over a dying thing. She stood there, wrists bound, dress torn at the hem, face lifted but eyes hollow. Her name was Maybelle Rourke, and no one wanted her. $20, the auctioneer barked. Sturdy girl, good bones, $20 to start. No hands raised. 15. Still silence. A child in the crowd coughed. A dog barked. The wind kicked dirt across Maybelle's boots. She did not flinch. The auctioneer's voice frayed with impatience. She can cook, clean, so ride. Strong back. Come on, gentlemen. $10 to take her off my hands. A tall man in a worn hat leaned against a wooden post just beyond the crowd. His boots were cracked, his shirt sun-faded, and the leather of his saddlebag lay flat against his leg, empty, save for one last coin. His name was Fletcher Dade. He had not planned to buy a woman today, but something in her face, not the fear, not the dirt, but the way she held herself upright even when the world had clearly given up on her, made his stomach twist. 5, the auctioneer muttered. Fletcher stepped forward, reached into his pocket, and held up the silver dollar. 1. The crowd laughed. A few men whistled low. The auctioneer stared. $1, Fletcher said again, firm. The auctioneer shrugged, spit, and banged the gavel. Sold. Maybelle's eyes met Fletcher's as the rope around her wrists was cut. She rubbed at the red marks, then squared her shoulders and walked down the steps without a word. Fletcher nodded toward his horse. You ride? Yes. He helped her up. She did not thank him. He did not expect her to. They rode west, past the edge of town, into the open land where the sky stretched so wide it made a man feel small. He did not speak until they stopped at a creek that shimmered under the afternoon sun. He handed her the canteen, watched her drink. You got a place to go? He asked. She shook her head. No family. No one waiting. Fletcher pulled off his hat and ran a hand through his hair. I got a small place up near Buckeye Flat. Cabin, barn, 2 mules. Land's rocky, but it feeds me. Just barely. Maybelle set the canteen down. You buying workers for your land? No, he said quietly. I just could not leave you there. She looked at him then, really looked. You spent your last dollar on me? Yeah. Maybelle's lips pressed tight. You a fool then? Maybe. They camped under the stars that night. Fletcher built the fire while Maybelle cleaned the skillet and cooked beans without being asked. When they sat on opposite sides of the flame, she said, I was sold once before. I ran. They caught me. This time, I stayed. He stirred the fire with a stick. Why? Because I was tired of running. He nodded. That made sense. In the days that followed, they moved slowly across the prairie. Maybelle rode without complaint. She woke early, packed camp, and rode beside Fletcher without needing to fill the air with words. He liked that about her. On the 5th day, they reached Fletcher's land. The cabin was small, the roof sagging a little on the left, but it stood solid. The fields were dry, but they held promise. Maybelle stood on the porch and looked out at the horizon. You live here all alone? Since my brother died. We came out together. He caught fever 3 winters back. I am sorry. He nodded. You can stay here. I mean it. Not as your property. No, he said, and his voice was low but sure. Not as anything you do not want to be. She searched his face for a lie. Found none. That night, she took the cot by the stove, and he slept in the loft. Rain tapped the roof soft and steady. Somewhere in the dark, Maybelle whispered, Thank you. From the loft, Fletcher said, You are welcome. In the weeks that followed, they worked. Maybelle patched the roof, mended shirts, planted onions and beans. Fletcher chopped wood, fixed the fence, helped a neighbor birth a calf. They moved around each other like wind and weak, quiet, constant. Sometimes he watched her when she did not see. The way her hands moved gentle over soil. The way her eyes softened when she saw a hawk glide overhead. She never smiled, not really, but sometimes her mouth curved just slightly, and he held on to that. One evening, he found her standing at the edge of the field, staring at the sky. "You ever miss a place?" she asked. "I miss someone," he said. "Not a place." She nodded like she understood. And then one morning, he found her crying behind the barn. Not loud, not broken, just quiet tears slipping down her face as she stared at her hands. He did not ask. He just sat beside her. After a while, she said, "I used to have a baby. A girl. They took her. Said I was not fit. She would be 5 now." Fletcher's throat tightened. "I had a wife once. Years back. She died in childbirth. Boy did not make it either." Maybelle looked at him, something raw and open in her face. "We lost everything. But we are still here," he said. She leaned her shoulder into his. He did not move away. The first time they touched without reason, no tools in hand, no task between them, was when he brushed her hair back from her cheek and said, "You do not have to be afraid here." "I am not afraid," she said. "Not anymore." That night, she took his hand. Not out of need, but something else. Something like trust. He held it tight. And for the first time since she stood on that block with the world looking at her like she was nothing, Maybelle Rourke felt like she was something again. And Fletcher Dade knew deep in his bones that spending his last dollar on her had not been foolish. It had been the best thing he ever did. The first frost came early that year, brushing the tops of the cottonwoods with silver and turning the morning air sharp enough to sting the lungs. Fletcher brought the mules in before dawn, breath rising in clouds as he rubbed warmth into their necks. Inside, Maybelle stood over the stove, sleeves rolled to her elbows, working cornmeal into batter with a wooden spoon worn smooth by years of use. "I can patch that gate today," she said without looking up. "The bottom hinges near rusted through." He nodded, wiping his hands on a rag. "I'll bring the vise out after breakfast. Got some square nails you can use." Maybelle scraped the batter into a skillet. "You still set on trading with the Slater boys this week? Need seed and sugar. They're the closest who'll deal fair. Bring back some cloth if they've got it. I can make a proper curtain for the loft." Fletcher studied her in the morning light, how her hair curled at the nape after sleep. How she moved with purpose but without rush. He hadn't heard her raise her voice once. Not even when the calf kicked her last week and split her lip. She'd spat blood, tied it off with a rag, and finished mucking the stall. "I'll see what they've got," he said. By noon, she had the gate swinging true again, and Fletcher had repaired the leak in the barn roof with old shingles they'd salvaged from town. They ate outside, backs to the wind, sharing cold beans and rough bread. Maybelle watched a hawk circle above the ridge. "You always work alone before I came?" "Mostly. Doesn't make a man lonely?" He chewed slow, then said, "Sometimes. But the land keeps a man honest. And quiet's not the same as lonely." She nodded. "I used to think noise meant life. Folks bustling, babies crying, dogs barking. Now I think quiet's the only place a body can breathe." The wind shifted. Leaves skittered across the ground, dry and brittle. Fletcher stood. "There's a storm coming. You feel it in your teeth." "Left jaw," she said. "Dull throb since yesterday." He smiled at that, just a flicker. "Mine's in the shoulder." They tied down what they could, moved tools into the shed, and filled the water barrels. By dusk, clouds had gathered low and heavy, the air tense like held breath. Inside, Maybelle lit the lantern. Fletcher sat at the table, sharpening a blade with slow, practiced strokes. She pulled her shawl tighter. "You ever think of leaving Kansas?" "Some days. Then I think wherever I go, I just be planting different fields, mending different fences." "You ever think of staying because I'm here?" He set the blade down and met her eyes. "I never once thought of leaving since you came." She crossed the floor, bare feet careful on the warped boards. "I don't know what to call what we got here, Fletcher. Don't have to call it anything." He stood, hands loose at his sides. "But I know what it is." She reached up, touched the edge of his jaw. "You reckon there's something after all that was taken from us?" "I reckon there's still good left to build on." The wind howled outside, rattling the shutters. Rain began to tap the roof, steady and insistent. Fletcher took her hand. "You're no one's burden, May." She leaned in, resting her forehead against his chest. "I want to stay. Not because I've nowhere else. Because I want this." His arms came around her slow, like easing into something too long feared lost. "Then stay." That night, they lay together in the loft, not for comfort, not out of need, but because it was time. The storm passed overhead, thunder rolling far off, and they held to each other like roots in wind, like the land itself had given permission at last. Come morning, the sun broke clean over the ridge, lighting the world with a new kind of gold. By late November, the wind came down from the north with teeth. Fletcher had boarded the windows 2 days before, and Maybelle lined the cracks in the cabin walls with old flour sacks and sheepswool she'd washed and carded herself. The land browned under the weight of the season, and the mules huddled close in the barn at night, steam rising from their backs like breath from a kettle. It was on one such evening, with the fire snapping low and supper eaten in clean silence, that Maybelle folded a length of wool cloth across her lap and began stitching. Fletcher set aside the tin he'd been mending. "You making something?" "A coat. Yours is near threadbare." He looked down at the elbows, worn pale from use. "Hadn't noticed." "I had." Her needle moved steady through the fabric. "Winters don't favor forgetful men." He leaned back in the chair, one leg stretched toward the warmth. "You always sew when you're thinking?" "Only when the thoughts run long." "What's caught you now?" She glanced at him, then returned to the seam. "What happens next spring?" Fletcher shifted, serious now. "You thinking of leaving?" "No," she tied off a stitch. "I'm thinking of planting." He let out a breath and nodded. "I've got a barley sack left from last year. Could trade for beans and squash. Maybe even try corn if the soil holds." She set the coat aside and rubbed her hands. "I want to clear the north field. It's shaded, but it'll take roots better than the slope." He stood, crossed to the shelf, and pulled down the ledger. "We'll need seed, fencing wire, and a second plowshare." The old ones cracked along the edge. Maybelle traced the grain in the tablewood. "I can take in mending from the settlement." Mrs. Alden's boy ripped his breeches again. "I told her I'd fix them." Fletcher marked a line in the ledger. "You still want to sleep upstairs?" She looked toward the loft ladder. "Not anymore." He closed the ledger gently. "Then don't." That night, she pulled her quilt down from the loft and laid it over the bed they now shared. The fire burned low, and outside, the wind scoured the land bare. But inside, there was warmth that hadn't been there before. Not just from the hearth, but from something built quiet over time, like moss on stone. In the weeks that followed, they worked in rhythm. Fletcher shaved frost from the troughs before sunrise. Maybelle soaked beans overnight and stretched flour with ash lye to make it last. They made plans without saying, so measured by how many boards to cut, how much salt to trade for, how long until the river thawed. One morning, Fletcher rode out early with a sack of cured hides and returned just before dusk, his horse heavy with supplies. Maybelle met him at the barn door, wiping her hands on her apron. "They had the wire?" she asked. He nodded, dismounting stiffly. "And the share. Traded half the leather for it." She stepped aside so he could unload. "You get the cloth?" He handed her a wrapped bundle. 3 yards. "Red, like you asked." She ran her hand over it, expression unreadable. "It's for a dress." He nodded slowly. "For church." "For me," she said. "For planting day. I want to wear something new when we begin." Later, as they shelled peas by lamplight, Fletcher said, "I saw a child at the post. Little girl with hair like yours." Maybelle's hands paused, just briefly. "How old?" "Maybe 6. She nodded once, then kept working. "I thought of what you told me," he said. "About your daughter." Maybelle kept her eyes on her hands. "I think of her less now, not because I've forgotten, but because I'm not afraid to remember." Fletcher reached across the table and touched her wrist. "If she were here, she'd be proud of you." Maybelle didn't speak for a long while. Then, softly, "I think she'd like you." He smiled, the kind that didn't reach the face but settled somewhere deeper. "I'd like her too." The next morning, they walked the north field together, boots sinking into earth still cold but no longer frozen. Maybelle pressed her hand into the soil, feeling its give. We'll need stakes to mark the rows, she said. I'll cut them from the cedar stand. She stood, brushing dirt from her palm. It's good land. It is. They stood in silence a while, wind tugging at their coats. Then Maybelle said, When we plant, I want to dig the first furrow myself. Fletcher met her gaze. It's yours to do. She nodded. Then let's build something worth staying for. And he said, without hesitation, We already have. The days lengthened slow as the thaw, and by the time the creek ran clear again, Fletcher had cleared the cedar for stakes and Maybelle had finished the red dress. She kept it folded in the chest beneath the window, beside a tin of keepsakes she never opened in front of him. The field they'd chosen had been turned by hand. The plowshare Fletcher traded for biting into the earth with effort that left calluses on both their palms. One afternoon, with the sun high and the planting near done, they rode out to the far ridge where the land tilted toward the Flint Hills. Maybelle carried a sack of seed, tied tight at the top, and Fletcher brought a spade and a jug of water wrapped in damp cloth. She dismounted first, boots sinking into the soft grass. I want to put something here. Something that stays. He handed her the spade. You thinking a marker? No. A tree. She knelt, brushed the soil with her fingers. A pear tree if it takes. You brought seed? It's from Arkansas. A preacher's wife gave it to me once, said it was from her mother's orchard. I kept it tucked in a Bible page. She glanced up. I didn't think I'd ever find ground worth giving it to. Fletcher crouched beside her, the wind stirring the brim of his hat. You sure this is where it belongs? She opened the sack and poured the seed into her palm. Yes. They dug the hole together, Fletcher breaking the deeper soil, Maybelle shaping the sides. She pressed the seed in with her own hand, covered it, then poured a slow stream of water over the mound until it pooled and soaked down. When they stood, she took a step back. If it grows, we'll know. He turned to her. Know what? That it wasn't just survival. That we built something kinder than what came before. Fletcher didn't answer right away. He watched the horizon, where clouds rolled low but not yet heavy. You think you'll ever want to marry again? She crossed her arms. I've never known marriage to mean safety. It doesn't always, he said. But it can mean choice. And I'd choose you. Maybelle didn't answer. She walked toward the edge of the ridge, stood with her back straight and her hands loose at her sides. Then she spoke, quiet but without hesitation. My name wasn't always Maybelle. I used to be Margaret before I was taken south. They changed it when I was sold. She turned to him. But I kept it because I earned it back. And I want you to know me by it. Fletcher stepped beside her. Then Margaret it is. She nodded once. If we marry, I want no preacher, no papers. I'll leave the red dress by your side one morning, and that'll be my answer. I'll look for it come spring, he said. They rode home without speaking, the horses moving slow over the thawing ground. That night, Margaret laid the seed sack back in the chest, beside the folded dress. She traced the seam with her thumb, then closed the lid without locking it. 2 days later, Fletcher took the wagon into Buckeye Flat to trade the last of the salted meat for nails and soap. He returned with a letter, crumpled and smeared with dust, addressed in a hand neither of them recognized. Margaret read it by lamplight, lips pressed thin. When she finished, she folded it twice and set it in the fire. Fletcher leaned forward. Bad news. She shook her head. A cousin. Distant. Says my daughter's living with a family near Wichita. She's well fed. Schooled. He reached for her hand. Do you want to go? No, her voice was steady. She's safe. That's more than I ever hoped for. In the morning, Fletcher found the red dress laid out on the bed, smooth and waiting. When Margaret came in from feeding the chickens, she met his eyes and said only, we'll plan together. He picked up the dress, held it with both hands like something sacred. And so, in the heart of Kansas, beneath long skies and over soil turned by shared labor, a cowboy and a woman once sold for $1 stood side by side, not to escape the past, but to sow a future they'd chosen, one row, one season, one quiet morning at a time. The barley came up pale green and thin-limbed, a hopeful reach from the earth that hadn't held much in years. Margaret knelt beside the rose one morning, hands deep in the soil as she worked lye soap into the cuffs of her dress, the red one she'd worn the day they planted. It had faded some with the sun, but Fletcher often said it looked like it belonged to the land itself, now stained with seed and weather, softened by use. She stood, wiping her palms against her apron, and walked to where he was splitting fence rails near the shed. "We'll need a scarecrow," she said. "Crows pick off the barley shoots if left alone." "I've got an old coat with holes in both elbows," Fletcher said. "Might give him pause." They worked without pause through the morning, her stringing rags and tying them to arms of cedar, him hammering uprights into hard ground. By mid-afternoon, the figure stood crooked in the wind, arms out as if waiting to gather something. Margaret stepped back, hands on her hips. "He's ugly enough to do the job. He looks like me after 2 days on the trail." She smiled, brushing hair back from her temple. "You ever think about what comes after harvest?" He set the hammer down and leaned against the fence post. "Maybe a second mule. Maybe a second room." "I was thinking of a stove with a proper lid," she said. "This one burns too hot and warps the pans." "I'll see what the Slater boys have next time," he said. "They took apart an old hotel kitchen last year. Might still have parts." She nodded. "I'd like that." The days passed in rhythm, not fast, but full. Margaret stitched new pillowcases from leftover muslin, white with blue trim. Fletcher laid a new plank floor in the loft, hammering each board flush and sanding the edges smooth. They spoke less often now, not from silence but from knowing each gesture, each task, already understood before it began. One warm afternoon, they rode south to visit the Alden family, whose youngest boy had taken to following Margaret around when she mended clothes in their parlor. She brought a spool of linen thread and a wrapped loaf of rye bread. Fletcher brought a borrowed book of sermons to return. As they rode back under a sky brushed with dusk, Margaret shifted in the saddle and said, "Mrs. Alden asked if I'd ever consider taking in a child." Fletcher's brow lifted. "She offering one?" "No," she said. "Just asked. Said there'd been a girl near Council Grove left behind by a traveling preacher and his wife. No kin claimed her. He didn't speak at first. Then, would you want that? To take her in?" Margaret looked ahead, where the land dipped low before the ridge. "I might, if you did too. I'd want her to have a quiet place," he said. "Something steady. A mother who knows what it is to endure. And a father who listens more than he talks," she added. They didn't speak of it again on the ride, but when they reached the cabin, Margaret laid a second bowl on the table that night. Neither of them said why. Summer came in full, and with it the barley turned gold. They harvested it by hand, side by side, sweat lining their collars and bees humming low among the stalks. Fletcher built a drying rack near the barn, and Margaret braided onion tops nearby, her hands moving in rhythm with his. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the western hills, a wagon pulled up near the edge of their land. A broad-shouldered woman climbed down, holding the hand of a thin girl with brown braids and a wary stare. The woman greeted them by name, having heard of them through the Aldens. "The child's called Elsie," she said. "She doesn't speak much, but she listens." Margaret knelt in the grass and met the girl's eyes. "Do you like chickens?" The girl gave the smallest nod. "We've got 6 and none of them behave," Margaret said. "Would you help me keep them in line?" Elsie looked at Fletcher, who crouched beside them, his voice low. "You ever ride a mule?" She shook her head. He smiled. "We'll show you." That night, Margaret laid 2 quilts on the loft floor, one of them stitched from old shirts and lined with wool. Elsie slept between them, her hands curled beneath her chin, not restless, not afraid. Weeks passed, and with them came new routines. Margaret taught Elsie to wind yarn, to knead bread, to fold laundry so it stacked neat and square. Fletcher showed her how to sharpen a pail hook and mend a loose hinge without splitting the wood. She never said much, but she watched everything. One morning, Fletcher found her sitting under the young pear tree, a small wooden horse in her lap. He crouched beside her. "Did you carve that?" he asked. She nodded once. He turned it in his hands. "It's fine work." She didn't answer, but when he stood, she followed him back to the cabin, the horse tucked under her arm. Summer gave way to the slow burn of early autumn. The fields darkened, the light drew shorter, and in the evenings they sat together by the fire. Fletcher read aloud from a book of folk tales. Margaret stitched a hem with Elsie watching close, learning the shape of a needle's path. One evening, as wind pressed against the shutters and smoke curled low over the chimney, Margaret rested her head on Fletcher's shoulder. "She's ours now," she said. "She chooses us every morning." He kissed the crown of her head. "And we choose her." Elsie lay curled near the hearth, the wooden horse in her arms. The fire lit her face, and for the first time the lines there were soft. Outside, the wind moved through the barley stubble, and inside every light was warm. Years later, when the pear tree bore its first fruit, Margaret picked one and cut it into slices for the supper table. Elsie, now taller than the kitchen door frame, bit into hers and said, "It tastes like sunshine." Fletcher laughed, his hand resting on Margaret's. "That's a fine thing to grow." And they knew then that the life they'd built, planted in quiet ground, tended with care and with grief, shaped by choice, had taken root. Not just in soil, but in each other. In the girl who had come without words and stayed without fear. In the barley that returned each spring. In the red dress folded now with care in the chest. A symbol not of beginning, but of everything they'd come through. The days ahead would bring more storms, more seasons, but they would meet them together. And in that corner of Kansas, where the earth once held only hardship, love grew quiet, steady, and sure.